From Talos of Necurs. Jaeson.
Thank you for the invitation to speak with you today. My name is Jaeson Schultz. I am a technical leader with Cisco's Talos group. Talos is responsible for security research and intelligence within Cisco. Today, I want to talk about Necurs, which is the largest botnet, the largest spam botnet in the world. Hopefully, through efforts such as this, eventually we'll be able to take it down one day. Necurs, the first mention I could find of Necurs actually sending spam was back in 2012. Microsoft did a blog, and that was almost 5 years ago to the day, December 6th of 2012. Since that time, we've seen a huge amount of spam coming from Necurs. In fact, sometimes it makes up more than 90% of the spam that Cisco sees in any one day. So, in this talk today, we're going to talk about the composition of the Necurs botnet. Where can we find most of the nodes that are participating? How much is the infrastructure reused across various spam campaigns? How big is the botnet itself, which is a difficult question to answer. We'll talk a little bit about the victims of Necurs. Who are the recipients? Where do these recipients come from? How have they been maintaining their recipient database over time? We'll take a look at some examples of some of the campaigns that they've been sending, and then try to make a stab at doing a little bit of attribution with some of the data that we have been able to recover from some of the campaigns. So I'm going to dive right in and talk a little bit about the data that backs up this project here. So the data that we got came from SpamCop. If you're not familiar with SpamCop is a free service where people can report their spam from anywhere to SpamCop. SpamCop will take those spam reports and create a blacklist of IP addresses that have been known to have sent spam. This service has been operating since about 1998, so we've been at this for almost 20 years. I took and extracted spam campaigns out of SpamCop that we had seen that belonged to Necurs. I used various elements like the subject headers, which tend to be fairly common, as well as other identifying headers and elements of the email to extract 32 different campaigns over the course of 4 months. Now that works out to be about 2 campaigns per week over the course of 4 months. I wanted that to be a fairly representative sample. In the end, we ended up with over 2.1 million spam messages as part of our set of research data, and that was sent by 1.192 million unique sending IP addresses. So regarding the question of how big the Necurs botnet is, you'll see later when we talk about the reuse of the infrastructure, but according to our data, it's definitely well north of 1 million unique sending IPs. Those IPs came from 216 different countries and territories. These are countries or territories with an ISO 2-letter country code. And what did we see? I tried to take representative samples, the fake bank statements, the fake invoices, the dating spam, the pump and dump stock spam that they've been sending, fake voicemail messages, and more. We'll see some examples later. So this was the data that I started with. Now, one of the first things that you do when you're looking at this information is you want to look at the sending IP addresses. And when we broke those out and we reversed those back to their geolocation, we found some interesting results here. And you can see, based on this graph, that the majority of the nodes that we saw participating in Necurs were located in India and Vietnam, followed closely by, you can see, Iran, then Pakistan. Let's see, we've got Indonesia, Brazil, Mexico, Bangladesh, Thailand, Colombia. None of these are necessarily representative of the largest industrialized nations that we see. And you can see the top 10 there, and then I've got the next 10 that round out the top 20. And you can see that it drops off fairly quickly, right? Compare this to the number of nodes that we've seen in some of the bigger countries, or maybe the countries with larger populations. In the United States, we only found 6,000 nodes. France, only almost 3,000 that came from France. One of the surprising results was at the bottom. Only 38 of the emails that we saw actually came from a Russian IP address, which I thought that was pretty interesting. So as far as percentages of total, India actually represented more than 25% of the total nodes that we saw. Vietnam represented about 20% of the total. So just between those two countries, we saw 45%, more than 45% of the nodes coming from just those two countries. Now, one of the other things that's interesting you can do with this information is just see how much are the IP addresses reused from campaign to campaign. And what we see here is that the vast majority of IP addresses, almost 1 million of those IP addresses, were only ever seen in one single spam campaign. And then at the bottom of the list, we only had 3 IP addresses that were seen in 30 different campaigns. There were actually 0 IP addresses that we saw in all 32 of the campaigns that we extracted. So this means that they've got quite a large botnet, doesn't it? They are able to mail from these IP addresses and then not reuse them for months. This causes a problem sometimes for services like SpamCop. SpamCop, when we get a spam complaint about an IP address, we send a notification email to let that network know that they've got spam going through their network. When we see the spam go away for a long period of time, we tend to assume that the administrator has cleaned up the spam problem. Unfortunately, in this case, the criminals behind Necurs actually have so many bots that they're able to send from them at an infrequent enough rate to actually do some serious damage here. And you can see just how quickly it drops off in terms of the number of campaigns and the number of IPs that were reused. So as far as a percentage of the total, it was 78.6% of the total IPs were only ever seen in one single spam campaign. Here are some of the IP addresses that showed up most frequently. I went through this list to try to see if there was anything interesting there. And, of course, you can find IP addresses that probably should not be living this long on the botnet. So we all, I think, need to do a better job of reading our logs and looking for evidence of activity such as this. So besides the sending IP addresses that are involved with Necurs, one of the other elements that we took a look at were the victims. Who is Necurs attacking with this spam? And based on all of the recipients that we were able to gather from the spam campaigns, we noted that they are primarily obtaining their email addresses from 3 sources. The first source would be online harvesting. Now, here's an example of an email that I received from Necurs. It was sent to Equifax @ Well, this was a tagged address that I gave Equifax, and it was actually not part of the 2017 breach. This was a breach that was years ago at Equifax, and that address escaped into the wild, and this is one of the addresses that Necurs harvested. One of the other elements of harvested addresses that we saw lots of email addresses with the number 20 at the beginning. And of course, in 20 hex is a space character, so this was most likely HTML encoding that these guys were actually extracting some of these email addresses out of. In addition to the harvested email addresses, these guys have also been generating their own user aliases. Here's an example of one, the MTAYOVOY. I've never used this address ever, but this is pretty typical of these style addresses that you'll see Necurs mailing to. So they're just kind of generating some of these user addresses, and if you run catch-all for your email like I do, then these things end up into your inbox. So besides these auto-generated addresses, they also mail to accounts that you might typically find at most domains, things like abuse @ in this case, things that are like common role-based accounts, webmaster @ so on. What's fascinating is in about the last month, Necurs has stopped mailing to the auto-generated addresses, and they're only mailing to the harvested and the role-based accounts that they've got on their list now. And I think that this is interesting because for about a year, Necurs had not changed their mailing list at all. They keep mailing to the same recipients over and over and over. And I had to wonder that if you keep mailing somebody the same ransomware over and over, how many times they're going to fall for it. And I've been waiting for Necurs to do some sort of maintenance to their recipient database, right? Like if you work in email marketing, you know that you have to curate your list. You're constantly adding new names to your list. You're taking names out that aren't profitable for you. Maybe those names of the people that do respond get put on a super special list for you to mail further in the future, right? You're going to hit that list extra because these are your good customers. Well, the people behind Necurs aren't interested in doing any of that. They've been largely mailing to the same set of addresses, so it was a bit of a surprise earlier this month when they stopped mailing to some of these auto-generated addresses that were clearly bogus. Further look at some of the common recipients indicated some oddness here. So you can actually see here's a list of accounts that we saw and the number of different domains that we saw with those accounts. And some of these are not surprising. Admin at, info at, right? These are going to be common across lots of domains. But what about things like petgord34truew? I had never created that address ever at my domain, but we saw it not only mailing to my domain, but we saw 18 other domains with this particular user alias as the email address. And that was strange. The same with this unity_unity and a single digit. I get these personally at my domain, and I also see that they've been mailing to these as well. Same with docs09, and I am just sending this letter with one T in the word letter. Well, we looked around and found a list. This is from Project Honeypot, and this is a list that they call the list of the top 100 dictionary attacker usernames. And lo and behold, on this list, we see petgord34truew, and we see I am sending this letter, right? So I'm not sure if this is it's kind of one of those chicken or egg problems, right? Did these names end up on this list because Necurs is mailing to them? Or did Necurs receive these names from this list and start using them for their mail campaigns? But either way, if you see someone mailing to petgord34truew, it's probably Necurs who's sending that to you. Now, the spam campaigns typically come in two varieties. Usually there are high-volume campaigns that exist from Monday to Friday, and then there are low-volume campaigns that kind of run continuously. Now, there are exceptions. We've seen them do high-volume campaigns on weekends, but this is the type of things that they're sending. Stock spam here, for example, this was advertising QSMG. This was one that they were hitting relatively hard. And you can actually see this was sent on April 12th. And here's what happened to the stock at QSMG. It shot up on the day after the initial run for this stock spam campaign. But if you were a long-term investor and you were holding on to your QSMG, hoping to extract some money from your investment, it's worth about, 2 cents now. They also do various dating campaigns. You might have seen these that take advantage of email accounts at rambler.ru. They've also been using accounts at gmx.com, and they've been known to use other free email providers in the past. It was interesting, we reached out to the CTO of Rambler because we had one of our coworkers was a contact with his on LinkedIn, and we provided evidence of the problem. And what did he say to us? He promised to block, liquidate, destroy, and send the bear on them. Maybe send the bear was some kind of weird Russian idiom that got poorly translated or something. But if you respond to these campaigns, if you actually send an email back to the email address that they're encouraging you to, you'll get signed up for a site like this Marmalades here with a free account. That's pretty much all they're doing. It's an affiliate-based model, right? Of course, Necurs is also responsible for most of the email-based ransomware that's going around these days, and this is typical of the ransomware campaigns that they send. Not very creative most of the time in terms of the content, although once in a while you do see something where they put a little bit of effort into it. This is a pretty well done Vodafone bill, or it looks like one anyways, but this one actually led to a ransomware campaign. This was a campaign that got sent earlier today. I have no idea what they're doing with this. There's no attachment, nothing. This is not the first time that they've made mistakes when they send out their mail. You know, they must have been out drinking last night too. And so, you know, for example, we saw it back here when they were doing their pump and dump stock spam. They sent out this message and it had no mention of the stock that they were pumping. So. We've also seen them going after cryptocurrency, right? The price of Bitcoin hit something like $17,000 yesterday, so it's obviously top of mind for some of these attackers as well. This was an email that was trying to get people to click on this link, and if you're eagle-eyed, you'll note that the word "my" appears twice. This is actually the site that they're spoofing with that URL. It's a place to store your crypto coins, right? We'll see more evidence of them doing similar things like that later on. They are also have their hands in selling pills and things. Here's an example of one of those messages. And this is pretty typical, using the compromised WordPress site as a URL to drop files or to lead the user to. So these are all usually compromised WordPress sites or other content management sites. So there's not much there that leads us back in terms of attribution. We did look at how much these are reused, and they tend to select a fairly small set per campaign in terms of reuse of URLs. This is an example of one of the lower volume campaigns. You can see here that this is in Italian. For some reason, they have decided that this particular user is Italian. And so you can see every single message that they've been sending me has been in the Italian language. Here's another Necurs recipient that they've decided must be Spanish. And so I'm getting the same job mail, but in Spanish. And you can see the only messages I get from them are in Spanish to this particular account. They've associated a language with some of the addresses that they mail to. And here is an example of one of the same job campaigns, but this one is in English. And this one's actually really interesting because it lets us take a stab at doing some of the attribution, right? So if you notice this URL that they are including here, it's at a domain newbinconsult.top. Well, if you do a whois lookup on that particular domain, you'll note that it is registered to whoisagent@gmx.com. Now, GMX, again, is a free email provider, but this is designed to look like a whois privacy protection service. You know, someone who's a security researcher at a quick glance is going to look at this domain and see something like whoisagent@gmx.com, and perhaps they'll think, oh, there's no more information for me to see here. But it turns out that whoisagent@gmx.com is really the attacker-controlled email address, and they've registered lots of domains. This particular one has about 400 domains associated with it. And if you go to Domain Tools, you can get a nice report like this that shows you the dates of the domains, when they were registered and so on. And this is actually a pretty interesting exercise. Besides being able to see what some of the other domains are that they've been registering, you can take those dates and you'll see, you know, for example, a lot of these campaigns, the one registered on February 22nd, it seemed to be about the standard 1-year domain registration, right? But if you go through some of these are a little bit more interesting. You can take some of the domains and look at the ones that have been registered recently and get an idea, you know, what are the attacks that these folks are conducting right now? And we can see, yes, these guys are very, very interested in crypto coins. These are all sites designed to trick people into logging in and providing their credentials to blockchain.info. One of the other sites that we saw, and that's why I say it was really interesting looking at the dates of the domain registrations, most of the domains were registered for a single year. In this case, they actually had maintained the domain registration for multiple years on this domain, pp24.ws, which anyone can sign up for an account there. And it's an account for buying and selling stolen credit card numbers with the CVV. And they're also doing SSH credentials and things like that. Anybody can do this. I actually found a reference on Reddit that this was one of the best places to buy stolen credit card numbers. We also get clues from passive DNS, and this is where we start to be able to connect more of the dots. So one of the domains here, the setinfoconf.com, caught my eye. I started looking at passive DNS. It turns out that the IP address that was hosting that was hosting a lot of other domains, and some of those domains were not owned by whoisprotect or whoisagent at GMX. They were owned by whoisprotect at Hotmail. Are you seeing the pattern here? Again, this is trying to evade folks who might want to, might want to be doing some research. The names changed. They're typically a Chinese name. Like here we have Wang Lao. What was the previous one? Xing Wang, Wang Lao, Wen Seng. They've even used whoisagent in the past as well, which we saw at the GMX account. So pretty sure that these are the same guys. They register the same types of domains. Their operational security leaves a little bit to be desired. Here we can see where the whoisprotect address is actually the technical and the administrative contact for a domain, but there's a whole different address as the registrant. And if you look at the domains involved with that address, they are pretty bad as well. So repeating this exercise, we were able to actually find a bunch of different registrant accounts that belong to the attackers. I was looking at some of those blockchain themed sites, and I found this IP address which belongs to Alibaba, and found a bunch of domains that were hosted around the same time. You can see 1019, 1021, 1025. These all have different domain registrants. And some of these may be familiar to you because if you do any research into attacks, these have been used in some other attacks. There's actually a couple more. We have these two as well. So I started looking around. Here's some evidence that SEO boss at sesnam.cz has been involved with the RIG exploit kit. And you can see that paultruce.gdn domain is located here. Gallicole at mail.com, similar. Locky, they're involved with Locky. There's the whois information for that domain. XLBS, also similarly up to no good. And Jiam Cho, 1955, again, some of these domains, the more you look, the more malicious activity that you can uncover. What was great about this was they were all hosted on the same IP around the same time. We reached out to Alibaba Cloud, and they were able to tell us that a single cloud instance was in control of that IP address for the entire 10-day period at the end of October. And so what we were able to do was essentially tie together various different domain registrations basically to the same group. We've also been able to establish the Hotmail account, whoisprotect at Hotmail. We were able to find some information out about who had been logging into that account, and it turns out that they were logging in from a VPS machine based in Russia. Okay, so attribution is hard, and we're going to keep digging on this. You can probably find even more if you dig into some of these addresses here. But this is the types of things that we're doing to try to combat Necurs from inside of Talos. So hopefully this has been enjoyable for you. I'm running near the end of my time, so I'm going to leave you with a bit of my contact information. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jason. Are there any questions? Yeah.
Hey, thank you for the presentation. I got two questions. First one, can you share from your experience what's the ratio between malicious payloads and other scams conducted by Necurs? Second of all, it seems to be like mostly service. Like all the infrastructures that you've seen are owned by someone else. Are some of the operations belonging to the Necurs operators themselves, like boutique operations that they use the network for?
Okay, yeah, good questions. So the ratio of malicious content to non-malicious content, I would say is somewhere probably 80-20 or 90-10. They send far more malicious content, and I believe that's probably because they make more money on ransomware than they do on things like affiliate campaigns, where they're just sending, dating spam or trying to get people to buy pills or something like this. And your other question was about the infrastructure. How much of that infrastructure belongs to the Necurs attackers themselves? Well, a lot of times they're reusing stolen infrastructure, right? They're reusing WordPress sites or other content management sites. But every so often we'll see them registering their own domains, and that's how we were able to get some of their domain registrant accounts. By following back through some of the passive DNS data, we've also been able to tie additional domains to them. I don't believe that they are entirely aware when it comes to things, like I said, like operational security. They're not necessarily thinking that we have that view into the passive DNS that we have. Otherwise, they would probably be doing a better job of hosting things in different places. They would certainly do a better job of making the registrations private, like using a real WHOIS privacy protection service. But it seems that maybe no one's come after them seriously, or maybe they're in a place where no one will. And so they just maybe don't care. Right? Good question. Thank you.
Thanks. We have another question just downstairs here.
Hi. You've mentioned that a single IP address would be used in only one campaign, or likely. Have you seen, how much of IPv6 adoption have you seen in that case?
I haven't seen much out of IPv6 yet. As a general amount that we see maybe less than 0.5% of the traffic that we see coming into SpamCop is sent from IPv6 directly. Most people who send email will use things like V6 to V4 gateways and the like. But occasionally we do see a piece of mail that's sent through IPv6, and it's on the order of less than 10, in several months. So, yeah. Thank you.
One more
Thanks.
question. Thanks
Yeah.
for the talk. Have you seen Necurs botnet becoming inactive for certain periods, and what's the longest period you've seen it become inactive?
Yes. So about a year ago at Christmas, it kind of went silent, or at least the high volume campaigns went silent. They were still sending those low volume continuous campaigns. It's almost, I feel like it's a setting that they turned on and kind of walk away, and it just keeps going. And I think they're doing that to try to take two different approaches, right? The stealth approach and then the bombing approach. But I've actually seen them take breaks of up to a few months. Some of the breaks have coincided with holiday periods out of the Russia-Ukraine area. But again, attribution is hard, who knows. They tend to send at all different times of day. Sometimes they'll take a week off. It definitely feels like this is a regular business for them. I strongly suspect that after the arrests in Russia, it was in May of 2015, there was some arrests related to the Lurk banking Trojan. And right after that, we saw several high-profile threats, including Necurs, drop offline. And the way that it's been managed since that time, not changing the recipient addresses, screwing up and just not even putting the attachment in there, these are all things that never really used to happen that much. And since then, they have been. So it almost feels like the guys who went to jail kind of gave their keys to the botnet to maybe one of their friends who has no clue what to do with it, and they're just trying to keep it going, right? But I do feel like there's a connection there, simply because of some of those activities, right? Shutting down right after the arrests and so on.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jason. Thanks.